Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about a project that some of us have been working over at NLS for the past year. And we're calling this the Indian Legal Scholarship Indexing Project. And essentially, the first output of this project is already out. We have a rankings system for Indian legal journals, which we published around last month. Right. What I'm going to do today is sort of discuss what the project is about, what's sort of the motivation behind the project, how did we build the data set, and how are we continuing to build the data set vis-a-vis the project, and some preliminary results. But I'm going to keep it short, and I'm going to hope that we get a few ideas from all of you, because this is, again, an ongoing project on how we should proceed with some of these things. Okay, so just about motivations and about how this project came up. Essentially, what we know about legal scholarship is that it's very, very fragmented, especially legal scholarship in India. Legal scholarship in India is largely based within law schools and largely driven by journals which are attached to particular law schools, right? And there is very little consolidated information about is writing in these journals and what are these journals targeted to, and who is reading these journals, and where is scholarship going in legal material in general, because of law's sort of specific quality of being a practice oriented discipline. A lot of lawyers generally detach themselves from research per se, right? And then this has been a perennial problem in law schools about how do we sort of look at the idea of this practice-oriented discipline and how it relates to the idea of research, right? So there is research in the courtroom, which is research that a lawyer would do to build their case, to build their brief, to argue before the court. And there is research which is in law schools, which is trying to develop legal doctrine in some material manner, right? And these two have always had a conflicting relationship. And the problem is that there's no central index or repository of legal material in India. There is something called Hein Online, which is sort of this huge data set of uh, American and European law reviews. There is JSTOR for some social science research in the law, but there is no such indexing service in India. And there used to be a yearly periodical which used to come out in print. A digitized version of those prints are now available by the Indian Law Institute, which used to be called the Index of Indian Legal Periodicals. And this used to sort of index by subject matter different legal articles that came in. But none of this was searchable, and all of this was done yearly. There's no consolidated database. And this, of course, was a problem in general in terms of how do we then read and adjudicate the quality of legal scholarship. And this is where the question of the rankings came up, wherein we saw a gap in the fact that UGC CARE, which used to sort of validate legal journals in India, stopped its list because of critiques that many people had made. And there was a validation gap in between deciding what is good legal scholarship and what is bad legal scholarship, and what are journals that are worth reading in the Indian legal arena and what's not, right? And most Indian law journals are not covered by the global indexes. Most are not covered by Scopus or Web of Science. So there's very little information on let's assume that I want to find some research on a particular legal topic in India. I wouldn't have a uniform or a singular source to go to. And I also wouldn't know which source to search from. Uh, this is particularly, again, a problem in law. I mean, this is true, by the way, of many social sciences as well, right? So some of you come from political science. You know that Indian scholarship and Indian publishing in political sciences is quite narrow. But law is particularly problematic because law is jurisdictionally defined, right? And so it's possible to write a social science piece on India because you're eventually doing science in a journal which is not published in India. But it's unlikely that there are things that are based on completely localized law, which is relevant only to Indians, which will be published in journals outside India, right? So the sort of base material for Indian legal scholarship continues to be this domestic legal scholarship sort of trail, but the uh, journals outside India do not really engage and do not have any incentive to engage with most of the scholarship, right? And so there is again this idea of, okay, how then do we develop this localized research in the area of law, right? Um, so there've been attempts made previously to map sort of how does legal research look and where is Indian legal scholarship going. There was a old uh, ICSSR project by Professor Bakshi and Professor Veena Das on trying to sort of map out some sort of sense of where the scholarship is going and who are the people writing about Indian research. Uh, but other than some sort of fragmented scholarship, basically non-empirical, basically not looking at uh, sort of the holistic, something in chat. Okay, this is fine. Yeah, so basically there is sort of fragmented scholarship on people critiquing this sort of lack of meta-narrative on where Indian legal scholarship is going, but nobody's actually gone ahead and done that meta-narrative. There's some, again, bibliometric work by libraries, but it's very superficial, and most of it is simply just gathering a sense of which journals are published by which university. So our sort of endeavor is to sort of solve some of these problems. And the way that we think about this is what we want to do eventually is build an index of all Indian legal scholarship wherever it is, right? Right from the inception, from early journals early law journals that India have. For example, the Madras Law Journal is an early legal journal which was established sometime in the 1900s, right up till the modern time, where journals are mostly led by the National Law School system, right? And we want to sort of collect all of this legal scholarship and try and sort of make a cohesive sense of, one, where it's going, and two, sort of how do we then access it in some material form. So for the first phase of the project, which is now complete, what we did is we tried to find, okay, how do we find a defined manageable sample of trying to collect some of this scholarship, right? And what we decided was we'll sort of restrict the sample to general law journals. By general, we mean journals that accept articles on all areas of law, and not only, so there is technology law journals, there are IP law journals. So we restrict it to only general law journals. We take law school rankings of by private and public players, so NIRF and some private players like India Today and Outlook. We looked at all of the universities that are there in these rankings, and then we sort of looked through that university and uh, some some problem here. And we looked through that university. We looked through those universities and examined whether they published any journal. If they published a general law journal, that was included in our sample, right? So regardless of whether it's faculty edited or student edited, right? So some journals, some law universities, like our own university, publishes both a faculty edited law review as well as a student edited title. We included both in our sample, right? We took a period of the last 11 years because we didn't want to face sort of digitization problems. As I said, a lot of Indian legal scholarship is not even available online. For example, there is a journal called Jaipur Law Review, in which Professor Upendra Bakshi used to write quite extensively. And that journal is nowhere to be found anywhere on the internet. The only way you can get access to a journal is in some limited libraries, right? So we didn't want to run into those kinds of problems. So we said, okay, fine, let's look at um, law journals that have been published from 2014 to 2024 and they come from these leading law schools. And we excluded journals that had less than 3 downloadable issues in this period, right? This left us with a total of 360 issues in around 29 journals. We then sort of ran this through some stepwise creation of our data set. We downloaded the PDFs of these journal issues. We separated each article of the journal issues. We used LLMs, and I'll talk about this more just now, to sort of help us create a data set of sort of the metadata of these journals. And then we coded components of these articles into a structured data set, right? So this project, by the way, would not have been possible, at least the scale at which we're doing it would not have been possible without the assistance of large language models and AI, right? So let me spend a little bit of time talking about how did AI help us and how did large language models help us. But I'm happy to talk about this more because this is sort of an important development that we've been seeing, and I know some of XKDR's work also sort of engages with this idea that LLMs can now help us to do better empirical legal research. So what we did was we first used LLMs to do extraction, which is we extracted different components of the article, the title, the abstract, the author name, the author affiliation, individual citations, and the content of the journal. We then used LLMs for data cleaning. So for example, if there's something called SA, so you'll have an affiliation where somebody's written AST.PROF. We can sort of standardize all coding through an LLM. We used LLMs for classification tasks, which is once we found a particular author or a particular title, we then used a prompt classifier and an LLM API to essentially classify different fields in the dataset. So the creation of variables such as author gender, author type, author nationality, subject matter, methodology, all of this was done through LLMs. And like I said, I can talk a little bit more about this later in the discussion if people are interested, because I think this is really a useful sort of technique to know, especially if you're doing data work with unstructured textual data. I think LLMs can help quite a bit when we're dealing with such data and creation of data sets. We verified the accuracy of this LLM generated data through human checks. We checked 10% of the data. We found 99% of accuracy, and we found that errors were not correlated to the data types, right? So errors were essentially exogenous to the data. Basically, errors were because there were problems with missing data and problems with the structure of the data rather than the type of data that was happening. So our final data set was approximately 3,745 articles, and we coded 54 variables on authors, on the text of the data, and on the text of the article and on the citations. And we had a separate data set where we sort of took each individual citation from each individual article and built a separate data set of that. So that's around 32,468 observations and 7 variables. So let me just sort of take you through some preliminary, as I said, descriptive results. We're not sort of theorizing about it yet. And essentially what we want to see is what is the data showing us right now. And as I said, this sample is quite limited. This is only top law schools, their publications, and basically their general journals. So most of the sort of scholarship is focused on is written by either people in academia, professors, or by undergraduate students, right? So undergraduate law students write 36.8% of articles within these journals, and law professors write approximately 40% of the articles in these journals. What is pretty notable is that judges write very, very small proportion of articles in these journals. And practitioners, and you can include law firms and litigators both in practitioners, write about 11% or so of the articles in these journals. So authorship is quite strongly dominated by the law schools and by members of the law school, and especially the undergraduate, right? So what's also interesting is that postgraduate and PhD students write a very small proportion of Indian legal scholarship. This also is very, this varies from journal to journal. So, for example, this journal on the left is the Indian Law Review. This is the highest ranking journal in our ranking system. And it's a journal which is published by Taylor and Francis and not really published by an Indian law school, although it has an Indian editorial board and it only accepts articles dealing with Indian law. But ILR, for example, has mostly academics publishing on it, and mostly people who are professors. Professors includes everybody. Professors includes assistant professors, lecturers, associate professors, etc. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have these student-run law reviews of some of these universities, the NLU Law Review, the UPES Law Review, which are dominated by undergraduate student articles and have very, very little scholarship by anybody else, including professors, right, or practitioners, right? So there's sort of wide disparity here, and most of these journals, by the way, don't sort of by rule dictate that you cannot write to them, right? A UPS Law Review, for example, is open to all authors, but inevitably it so happens that undergraduate students write for these journals, right? Yeah, so just some statistics on the data. 40% of authors are from UG scholars from India, around 11% authors are practicing lawyers, 1% of authors are judges, around 73% authors are male, around 33% authors are from national law schools, and the national law school system is a system built where each state has a law school which is designated. Now each state has multiple, but yeah, most states have a law school that's designated as a national law school, which has certain sort of common elements such as having all India enrollment and having a common entrance exam, which is held all India for admissions. And 10% of the authors come from my university, which is the National Law School of India University. Around 30% of articles have two or more authors. So most articles are single author, and only around 3% of articles have three or more authors, right? So Indian legal scholarship at least doesn't have this sort of multi-author kind of trend. What are they writing on? This is actually a word cloud, but as you can see, it's a dispersed word cloud because people are writing on very, very diverse things. This is also a problem with the LLM coding because this was sort of an unsupervised prompt where we don't anchor the LLM into specific categories. And I can again talk about this more. But essentially what you can already see from the middle, which is sort of the most common topics, is that most of the scholarship in India is focused on public law, right? So judicial review, judicial independence, constitutional law, basic structure, uniform civil code, right? Things that are sort of integral to the public law system, right? The private law sort of article scholarship is very sparse in our data set, at least, right? So at least in these generalist law review, very few people write, especially on topics such as contracts and torts, which are sort of the bread and butter of civil lawyers in India. What are the methods that these articles used? And again, most scholarship in our data set is revolving around doctrinal research, right? And by doctrinal research, we basically mean using the sources of law as your primary evidence to do your research, right? And so if you're dealing with case law, if you're dealing with statute exclusively, if you're dealing with doctrines of interpretation and only using those facts exclusively, only using legal facts exclusively, then you would classify as a doctrinal article, right? So most of the articles that are there in our data set, around 75%, are doctrinal articles, right? There is some comparative work, which is, again, mostly doctrinal. There is very little empirical work. There's very little qualitative or quantitative work on written in these law reviews. So again, mostly public law topics, private law topics are ignored, and most articles use doctrinal methods. Finally, I just want to talk about who are these articles writing for. And one would imagine that if you're trying to write doctrinal stuff, if you're using the doctrinal method and writing about public law, you would want to influence public law in some meaningful manner, right? So you would want to basically your audience to be the courts or the lawyers who are practicing in these courts, who can then sort of develop the law as things go on. That's not the case, right? And out of the 29 journals that were there in our data set, only 7 were mentioned by any court at any time, right? So this is not only, by the way, our data set, by any court at any time, from 1950 onwards, right down to 2024. No engagement with any of these journals, right? The one which had the highest reach is a journal called the Journal of the Indian Law Institute, GLI, and that was mentioned approximately 66, has been mentioned around 66 judgments. But again, if you sort of narrow it down to our period, which is 2014 to 2024, there have been 0 engagements with GLI. So all of these 64 engagements were prior to 2014, right? So it so happens that there was some engagement. There's very limited engagement with scholarship by the courts, but now there seems to be almost none, at least when we're talking about these 29 journals, right? And by the way, so you can think about the number of judgments that could have potentially cited scholarship. So we're looking at around 50,000 SC judgments and around 20 lakh high court judgments, right? So in 20 lakh high court judgments, you have something like 100 citations to this scholarship. Maybe they are writing for other scholars, right? Maybe you're trying to sort of develop a research agenda and talk to other scholars. So what we did was we tried to find network matches of articles citing another article in our data set, right? So within network nodes. And what we found again was that there is very, very sparse engagement with scholarship, other Indian legal scholarship, right? So if you look at the right, you'll find all of these journals have not had a single article cited from any of the other journals, right? Or their own journal, which is, right? So not a single citation to any of these journals, right? The maximum, again, is NUJS Law Review, but which is 122 citations across all articles in our data set, right? And this is, I think, around 250 articles in NUJS, right? So on average, even NUJS had 0.5 citations to any other piece of Indian legal scholarship published in these 29 journals from 2014 to 2025, right? So, I mean, the picture, I guess, and what we did was also we sort of, because our sort of data set is limited, we also looked at Google Scholar citations. And again, there's some methodology behind how we did this, because Google Scholar citations are difficult to sort, and you usually can't do them exhaustively. But again, even if we look at Google Scholar citations, there are journals that have not been cited by a single article that is indexed. And remember, Google Scholar doesn't only cite published peer-reviewed articles. Google Scholar cites everything. So books, chapters, anything that's indexed, preprints, whatever. None of them have referred to a single article by some of these journals. And again, the maximum citations are by these 2 journals, Indian Law Review and the Jindal Global Law Review, right? So, I mean, this should raise existential questions about where Indian legal scholarship is and where does it need to be, right? And that is sort of what we found in this sort of preliminary study. And we continue again to work with this data and think about what is it that is what is it that's making that's resulting in this phenomena of isolated, fragmented scholarship, right? So not for judges, only 1% of articles cited in judgments, and uh, right, and within in corpus citations are around 0.9 citations per article, right? So essentially, what we know is that Indian legal scholarship continues to be fragmented and dominated mostly by the law schools. And again, I'm not sure who reads. And unfortunately, we don't have readership statistics, so we're not sure whether people are actually even reading some of the scholarship. There is a very famous World Bank report that shows that on average, a World Bank report is read by 0.3 people. Right. So I think that's the case with Indian legal scholarship as well, right? And there are articles that are widely read as well, but most of Indian legal scholarship, and these are top law schools in India, total sort of student count of around 1 lakh students. None of them seem to be engaging with scholarship or reading it. But I don't have the readership stats, right? So I in my research methods class, I teach a research article by Rajiv Dhawan of the 1975. He sort of looked at Indian legal research at that time, and he concluded that with notable exceptions, much of the work being done in universities is to secure tenure, appear busy, or acquire publishing status. Right. Around 40 years since, I don't think anything has changed. I think this is representative of Indian scholarship today as well, right? So next steps for this data set, we want to, of course, expand coverage quite strongly. As I said, this analysis is only part of our project endeavors. One of the more important part is to basically build the index and build a sort of repository that can be accessed by the public. We want to expand analysis to look at citation networks. We want to know who is citing who, and if they're not citing each other, then who are they citing? Yeah, as I said, we want to develop a public access searchable index, right? So that's my presentation, and that's about the project. You can look at the rankings. There is a blog piece out in the NLS blog, and the rankings are available in this ranking site. I can talk about the rankings, but honestly, the rankings are the least important part of this project. We call it our strategic output. It's probably going to be the most seen, but it's probably the least important. But you can go ahead and see the rankings, and yeah, then my contact details are there. So if after this, if you have some thoughts about the project, if you want to be involved, if you want, we were particularly really looking for people who can help us get access to some of these legacy journals that are not available digitally. So if you have some access to that, that will be really helpful. But yeah, I look forward to your comments, suggestions, and any discussion. Yeah, thanks.